Hello, I'm Nathan Robinson of Current Affairs, and tonight I'd like to talk about a very serious story. This is the sexual assault allegation against Joe Biden. I've written about this in an article called Evaluating Tara Reade's Accusation, and today I'd like to go through some of the arguments that have been made about the credibility of this accusation and think about what it means and how we can think about it. An accusation like this, in which someone comes forward many years after the fact and there were no witnesses at the time, is difficult to prove or disprove, obviously. So all we can do is look for the kind of markers of credibility and see if the accusation is credible. And let me just emphasize why I think this whole exercise is important and necessary. Joe Biden has now sort of wrapped up the Democratic nomination, but the accusation that Tara Reade has come out with against him is very serious. If you haven't listened to the interview that she did on the Katie Halper show, I think you should, because she speaks very emotionally and very clearly about what she says happened to her in 1993 when she was working as a Senate staffer for Joe Biden. She says, and just be warned, we're going to talk about sexual assault. She says, first, that Joe Biden engaged in a number of sort of lesser predatory behaviors, running of his fingers down her, and that sort of thing. It's kind of the sort of stuff that he has been accused of by a number of other women already. So that stuff is very, very plausible because there are now 8 women who have come out and said that Joe Biden touched them inappropriately in some way. But Tara Reade is different because she came out and said that in addition to these lesser instances, there was an incident in 1993 in which Joe Biden seriously sexually assaulted her. And what she says is that at one point she was asked to go and bring him a gym bag. She met him in a sort of private alcove, and when she met him, gave him the bag, he seized her and put his hand up her clothes, and she says digitally penetrated her. And this it lasts a very short amount of time, but Tara Reade says, and this is very common, very plausible, that this really shattered her and stayed with her for life. He just says that Joe Biden had been someone that she really looked up to, and then he attacked her in kind of a brutal way. And I think that's incredibly important. It's very strange that we live in political times where it almost seems like I have to make the case for why that's important. You'd think in the post-Me Too era, we would understand that having a political candidate who wants to be the president of the United States, who sexually attacked a woman, that person shouldn't be put in a position of great public trust because they've abused their authority over their staff. And that should be an absolute disqualification. Now, of course, people say, well, Donald Trump's the president, but I think that's kind of the point, is that, I thought when the allegations against Donald Trump came out, the so-called pussy tape, that he wouldn't be the president of the United States, but he is, and that's a disgrace. Because we expect better of our elected officials. We don't want there to be people who violate in the most horrible way other people sexually. And especially if it's a staffer, right? Because that's an abuse of the actual power that we are thinking about giving this person. So an allegation like this about a staffer is very serious. It has to be taken seriously. But of course, on the other hand, there are, you do need to make sure that accusations are credible, because, and this has been the whole critique that has been made of Believe Women and Me Too, which is to say that people do lie. Not every person is good. Some people are not good. And if you believe every story, if you don't have some kind of due process, if you don't look into credibility, accusations might fall apart and they might damage someone very unfairly. And an accusation like this can really damage someone, even though Donald Trump managed to be the president. There is a lot of power to hurt people's careers, and if this sort of accusation becomes really easy to make and isn't looked into, then that could be harmful. I mean, we've had things like the Rolling Stone UVA rape story, which completely fell apart, and that really damaged Rolling Stone's credibility. So it's important to actually weigh the facts and the evidence, I think, and I understand why people might be skeptical, because the implications of Tara Reade's claim about Joe Biden are very significant for the Democratic Party and for really the future of the country and the world. Because if we say that it's a disqualifying thing, it's a massive issue, if it happened, it needs to be talked about, well, it's unclear if Joe Biden is brought down by a scandal, what happens with the Democratic primary. And if Joe Biden, the Democratic presumptive nominee, is brought down by a scandal, what happens with the effort to beat Donald Trump? Does Trump who runs against him? Does Joe Biden keep running? Does he get replaced somehow? How does this work? What happens if this allegation starts to get coverage? And I really do think, I don't think it's a media conspiracy, but what I do think is that there are a lot of people in the media who are very reluctant to wade into something that they think just by publicizing could destroy the chance of ousting Donald Trump. Media people are sensible enough to understand that Donald Trump poses a really significant threat to the future of democracy. So if you publicize an accusation that destroys the candidate who's running to beat him, that could result in serious harm to the world, right? We absolutely have to start tackling climate change, and if Donald Trump's reelected, emissions are just going to skyrocket. He's going to control the courts. It's going to be really, really, really bad. The media hasn't really been reporting as of right now. There might be more stories coming out, but as of the moment I'm recording this, the media has not reported that much on it, as much as you'd expect. Newsweek has covered it, but it has mostly been more independent outlets. And Salon ran an article by Amanda Marcotte suggesting that this was because there were a bunch of red flags about the accusation by Tara Reade, and essentially suggesting that Tara Reade might not be credible. Now, I have talked to Tara Reade extensively on the phone, and I've also talked to the two people that Tara says she spoke to in 1993 when this happened, and they have told me that she did, in fact, tell them about this when it happened. And I went into more detail with a friend that she spoke to than I did with her brother, who just basically confirmed that, yes, in fact, Tara had told her mother and him. Their mother has now passed away, but Tara wanted to call the police in 1993. So, to me, that makes the accusation credible, because she has witnesses, right? She doesn't have witnesses to the actual crime that she's alleging happened, but she does have people who will vouch that she's been saying this since 1993. And that's quite important, because one of the main questions that is raised about Tara Reade's accusation is, why now? Why come out against Joe Biden right at this moment when he's wrapped up the nomination? Where have you been all this time? Now, in one respect, I think this is a very unfair question. It's true, first, that Tara has talked about this since 1993. But, more importantly, I actually think the timing is not really suspicious in any way. In fact, the timing, to me, makes perfect sense. Because if you think about it, if you're a woman who has a story like this, something that happened with a major political candidate, when are you going to come forward? Let's understand, right, that it's not easy to come forward, because people are going to scrutinize every aspect of your life, and you're going to be known like Christine Blasey Ford was known, like Anita Hill was known. Your name, you're going to become famous for one thing and one thing alone. Everyone's going to associate with you with it for the rest of your life. So women are very reluctant to come forward because often they get, just dragged through the mud in the press. They get death threats. You're going to get death threats. That's just a given. And so the time that it seems to me that you would expect to have an accusation like this come forward, if it's true, is the moment at which the person, it's the last minute. It's the moment at which they go, oh my God, this is really going to happen. If I don't speak up now, this person's going to be a major party presidential candidate. And so Joe Biden wasn't doing very well through a lot of the primary. He was really failing after Iowa, a dismal performance in Iowa and New Hampshire. It wasn't until after he won South Carolina and he really got rolling that there was suddenly Biden swept in to the nomination very, very quickly. And so it makes sense that Tara Reade would not have come forward at a point at which it seemed like Joe Biden was going to be losing. Why would you go through all of that if the candidate wasn't going to go anywhere? Now, you might ask, well, okay, why didn't you come forward in 2008 then when Barack Obama picked him as his VP? And what Tara says about this, and what Tara's friend confirms that Tara said to her in 2008, is she just liked Obama so much that she didn't want to hurt his campaign through coming out publicly against Joe Biden. She said, vice presidents don't have much power. I really don't want to sink Obama with this. I'm just going to ignore the fact that Biden is his VP. That's her explanation for it. That seems quite plausible to me, considering how much people liked Obama. And, that's what she told herself. But it is very different being the president. And so it does make sense that you would come forward when you thought that person was definitely on the path to being the president. And we also have to understand Tara Reade first publicly came forward in April of last year, 2019. And at that point, she came forward because Lucy Flores, a Democratic politician, had come forward with the story that Joe Biden had touched her inappropriately, that he had come up behind her and kissed her, and that she had been really disturbed and upset by it. And Tara says that she came forward then, after Lucy Flores, because Joe Biden had said something like, or the Biden campaign or some surrogate had said, well, why aren't any of the people who have ever worked for me, why aren't they complaining? And she, of course, had worked for him. So she came forward to the press and said, well, I can confirm as someone who worked for him that he did this to me too. And Tara says that she would have gone further with the story, but that the reporters that she talked to really were kind of aggressive and were kind of, very confrontational about it and wanted to push her and seemed to weirdly, she says they kind of didn't want her to say it was sexual. One reporter was like, but it wasn't sexual, was it? And she's like, I don't know. And then that was quoted as she says it wasn't sexual. And she felt very intimidated by it. You gotta understand, when someone is sexually assaulted, it's very, very difficult for them to talk about their story. This is probably the worst thing that has ever happened to them. And it is a very, very emotional. I mean, if you listen to Tara Reade's interview, you will realize that it is not easy for her to talk about this. And so it makes sense to me that she didn't tell all of her story in April of 2019. That makes sense. But she did, and there's a story in The Intercept about how what she did was she went to an organization called Time's Up, which is a project of the National Women's Law Center that is designed to give legal and PR help to women who have been sexually abused to help them tell their stories. And Ryan Grimm in The Intercept reported that he talked to Time's Up, and Time's Up told Tara Reade that they could not help her because Joe Biden was a candidate for federal office, and it might seem political, and they were a 501c3, they couldn't get involved in politics. Well, I mean, that justification is clear bullshit, right? It's just bullshit, because there's nothing about being a 501c3 that means you can't pursue claims against someone running for a federal office. That's just not true, right? So they bullshitted her. And there have been efforts to say, well, Time's Up doesn't really do what Tara Reade was looking for. But they said, the reason they gave was that he was a candidate for federal office. That's what they told The Intercept on the record. So And so they gave a bullshit justification on the record. That's what we know. Okay? And they did not say that they disbelieved Tara Reade. That's very important. They didn't say that it was anything to do with her credibility. Now, fun fact. Time's Up uses a PR firm in order to tell the stories of women who are the clients of Time's Up. And the PR firm, SKD Knickerbocker, is run by Anita Dunn, who not only has advised Harvey Weinstein, which is a little weird and kind of gross, but is a senior advisor to the Joe Biden campaign, who also recently, I think, disparaged Bernie Sanders and said he was the kind of person you'd find like holding a sign at the back of a rally, which is why I like him, by the way. But yeah, Anita Dunn sucks. Now, I don't think there was a conspiracy where Time's Up told the PR firm, they said, oh, we got this allegation from someone who says Joe Biden sexually abused them, and they said, oh, shut it down, and Anita Dunn went, shut it down, shut it down. I don't think that's what happened at all. I think that actually they just went, oh, shit, Biden, this is a can of worms. I don't think Anita Dunn even ever heard about it. But I do think that this is very, very fishy, and I have looked through Tara Reade's claims, and I encourage you to listen to the interview yourself, and I've concluded that she seems pretty credible. I don't know how you evaluate these things, and I've looked through some of the criticisms that have been made of her to see if there are big holes that would make us think that she's not credible. And thus far, again, something could come out. I don't know. Right? I don't know this person, so I can't actually vouch for her. But as of right now, I don't see any of the arguments really holding up. There is this Salon article by Amanda Marcotte, as I mentioned, and she says she's just sort of laying out the facts. She says, I'm just doing the facts. I have no dog in this fight. I believe women, but I just want the truth. But it ultimately is a very damaging article for Tara Reade because she says, well, the Biden people are putting out some talking points that are wrong, but the pro-Tara Reade people are putting out some talking points that are wrong. I just want to sort out truth from lies. But the criticisms of Tara Reade that she debunks are stupid things. They're things like, was she a woman who appeared on the Dr. Phil show and said Vladimir Putin was her boyfriend? And Amanda Marcotte goes, no, that's a lie. And she says, is she a Russian agent? And she says, a real Russian agent would have covered their tracks better, which it's not very generous at all. But so she debunks stupid stuff on the anti-Reade side, but on the pro-Reade side, bolstering her credibility, she really lays into Tara Reade's story. It really kind of undermines her credibility in a way that is very damaging. But if you actually look at the things that she says, I don't think there's anything persuasive there, right? So I think this is very important. She says Reade's story of what happened during her tenure working for Biden has changed over time. Her April 2019 account of why she left Biden's office also conflicts with earlier things she's written before 2019. I'm skipping over some bits. She lived under another name. Oh, and then it talks about how she engaged with Bernie Sanders supporters publicly. And she said when asked why her story had changed so much in the past years, she told Salon she considered describing the assault to the original reporter, but she had been shut down and she felt intimidated by social media attacks. To be clear, this does not mean she's lying, but taken along with the other discrepancies in Reade's account, it means publications should take a slow and careful approach. Now, the point that Amanda Marcotte makes, and that a similar article in Jezebel makes, is that Tara Reade needs more investigation before we report it. Right, and I think that's actually very plausible to people because they hear, well, we've got to vet this thing. It's a serious allegation. And they say, oh, well, it needed more investigative reporting. Now, one thing is Tara Reade tried for months and months and months to get an investigative reporter to listen to her, and nobody would listen. She emailed, Ronan Farrow and people, and she couldn't get her calls returned, right? I think it's understandable because, as I say, it's not that there's a conspiracy. It's just that if Joe Biden is significantly damaged, it really, really hurts the cause of defeating Donald Trump in people's mind. But if you listen to the thing I just read out with from Amanda Marcotte, Tara Reade's story hasn't really changed in any significant way. The one thing that is a change is that she wrote a blog post 2018 where she gives a different reason for leaving DC. She says she was like sick of American imperialism or something. And I think she said she wanted to pursue her love of like Russian culture. But for the most part, her story hasn't changed. And the fact is that the fact that she said she didn't say she left DC because Joe Biden had assaulted her on a public blog post, right, does not discredit her to me, right? If you didn't say that the reason that you left the town was because you were assaulted by your boss, I think it's pretty understandable that you might not say that publicly on your blog for a while until you're comfortable with it. Other than that, her story hasn't changed. She's opened up about parts of it, but I think it's kind of unfair to classify this as a change. And there's an op-ed in Common Dreams by Professor Anthony Zenkus, who is an expert on sexual violence at the Columbia School of Social Work, and he said it's well understood in the sexual violence advocacy community that survivors take time to tell their full stories, right? And he says, he gives an example of a survivor that he met when he was working in an advocacy agency who, let out little bits over time until the truth finally came out, because often it's stuff people kept bottled inside of them. So it's pretty unfair for Salon to take what is a very normal process among survivors and portray this to the audience as reason to doubt Tara Reade when it's actually exactly what we would expect if the allegations were true. Now, I have seen so much bullshit on social media trying to discredit her. There's a tweet thread. Tweet thread. It's not journalism, but this stuff spreads. There's a guy who worked for the Daily Banter called Jeremy Fassler, who the reasons he gives are things like Sean King promoted Tara Reade's story. Well, who the fuck cares if Sean King promoted it? That doesn't tell you whether she's telling the truth. And then I even saw someone saying, Tara Reade, this was crazy. This is just some blog, but they said Tara Reade posted on the PayPal community help forum looking for assistance linking her bank account with her PayPal. Isn't that suspicious? As if we don't all have fucking PayPal accounts. So that's the kind of stuff you get. Now, the real thing that people are going to come after her for, because the Democrats have this anti-Russia hysteria now. Hysteria, and I don't like that one. But, the anti-Russia paranoid, they're paranoid. They're paranoid. Is that she posted a bunch of stuff about how much she loves Russia. Tara Reade went through a phase where she was obsessed with Russia, because she had some Russian friends, she got really into Russian history and culture. There's this weird thing where you say the word Russia and it sounds nefarious now, but Russia's cool. Russian novels are cool. She said she was writing a novel, and she said some positive things about Vladimir Putin, okay? She did. She didn't know much at the time, she says, and she learned more. Who the fuck cares? It's got nothing to do with it. This is the thing. They're going to talk about, Tara Reade's things about Putin, and that doesn't tell you anything. Amanda Marcotte also cites Tara Reade's, quote, involvement in the Bernie Sanders fandom community, suggesting that perhaps she's, doing this to just promote Bernie? But actually, Tara Reade supported Hillary Clinton in 2016, and this year she supported Elizabeth Warren until Elizabeth Warren dropped out. It's not really a Bernie bro. She ended up supporting Bernie Sanders in part because Bernie supporters were the only people who'd listen to her, and also because Bernie Sanders is the last candidate who didn't assault her. So it's kind of understandable she had. But also, Amanda Marcotte hates Bernie Sanders. She's got tons and tons of stuff. You go through and look through her tweets and her articles. She hates Bernie Sanders. So if Tara Reade being involved with the Bernie people is reason to discount her, I think we should look askance at articles by people who hate Bernie Sanders, whose articles just so happen to suggest that, in fact, the media is right not to publicize a story that would hurt Joe Biden. So I think the Salon article is really dangerous and damaging because she suggests first that it's clear that Time's Up didn't reject Tara Reade for assistance for anything to do with Biden, and she also says that the media is not reporting it, has nothing to do with it being about Biden. But I think it might well have something to do with Biden, because, as I say, no one likes Trump in these circles. But also, I think it's very unfair to suggest that there are big red flags about Tara Reade when there really aren't. There may be eventually, but there aren't so far. She's got more corroboration than Christine Blasey Ford had. When Christine Blasey Ford came out, the media reported the allegation immediately, even though she didn't have anyone that she told at the time. They didn't seek to vet it. So no matter what, there's a complete double standard, right? And I think that, unfortunately, that makes it seem like all of this stuff about how much we care now about women's allegations is not really true. It's kind of politically opportunistic, because like if it's a Republican, if it's Brett Kavanaugh, then yeah, we care. But if it's someone who goes after our guy, suddenly we care so much about vetting. We're all talking about due process. Alyssa Milano, is a big Me Too person, said, I really believe that due process is important. You go, well, I agree due process is important, but did you believe that 5 minutes ago when it was against a Republican? And I think it's important to be consistent. I mean, I hate Brett Kavanaugh. I read 11,000 words of how he was a lying sack of shit. I went through everything that he said in his testimony to Congress and exposed what a liar he was and why we ought to believe Christine Blasey Ford. But I'm consistent. Now, it's no secret that I've been a Bernie supporter, so you shouldn't just listen to my arguments. I'm biased because some part of me still hopes that there's some way Bernie Sanders could be the nominee. And obviously this allegation would be severely damaging to Joe Biden. At the same time, look at the allegation. If it doesn't hold up, fine. But I think we all have to take it seriously. There seems to me to be no reason in the list of criticisms of her that we have now. There doesn't seem to me, the criticisms are often stupid. Right? Howard Dean sent a tweet, something like, The Intercept reported this. And The Intercept is, I don't know what it said, like Russian propaganda or something. Well, that's got nothing to do with anything. So look, what I would suggest you do. Again, don't listen to me because I'm biased. And bias is bad. What you need to do is listen to Tara Reade. Look at the statement. I've got some statements in the article I did from her friend who's talking about what Tara said to her at the time. And I think there's going to be more from the friend coming out soon. Listen to it. See if you think it's credible. And if it's credible, we got to take it seriously. And we got to look into it. We can't ignore it just because we want Joe Biden to be the guy. Because this is why it needs discussing now, even in the midst of coronavirus, which is also one reason why it's this is shunted to the side. But it's not a reason why it hasn't been reported, because it's incredibly consequential. And Democrats who think this is going to go away are wrong, because what it is in fact going to do is, even if it doesn't get reported right now, Democrats are handing a loaded gun to Donald Trump. This allegation will be brought up in the general election. It will matter because Tara Reade's story is harrowing and she has witnesses. And even though Donald Trump does this all the time himself, he grabs them by the... Even though he's still going to air the audio in his ads, and Joe Biden is going to be bad at... What is he going to... Oh, you rape people too? It's just... Oh, it's going to be terrible. This isn't going away. So, got to talk about it now, because my thinking is Joe Biden really shouldn't be the Democratic nominee for president. Because, at least as of right now, there's not much reason to ignore the sexual assault allegation. And to be honest, if we are good people, if we care about what we say we care about, if we care about women not being assaulted by their bosses, if we care about having some basic, just very basic standard for character, then we should be outraged by this. This should be disgusting. I mean, in fact, I know why Bernie Sanders hasn't brought it up politically, right? Because it probably won't help her to have him bring it up. But, he should care too. We should all care. Allegations like this are serious. You can't treat them as frivolous. And having had Tara Reade on the phone to me say, nobody's listening to me. I feel like, because I ended up believing her, that I agree that it's gone on too long that people have ignored women, and this is a key example of it. And if we care about Me Too, we have to take Tara Reade seriously. Just wanted to come back and do a quick postscript here, because in the time since I last talked to you, the New York Times has actually released a story. Now, the fact that the New York Times has finally reported on this does not mean that that it's still unfair to talk about media silence, because we know that the timing of the Christine Blasey Ford reporting was that immediately when she came out with the allegation, it was reported in all the papers and all over the news. So they've really come late to the game here, but they do have a long and comprehensive report called "Examining Tara Reade's Sexual Assault Allegation Against Joe Biden." If you look at it, it's not. I don't think it's very good. It gives a lot of space to Biden people and former Biden staff to go, we don't know anything about Tara Reade being sexually assaulted by Joe Biden. But the important thing about the New York Times article, the thing that makes it worth going into, is first, in addition to what exists already, it doesn't really add that much. The Times say they talked to dozens of people, and they say for the most part, it wasn't that they didn't dig up anything negative on Tara Reade that suggests that she's not telling the truth. They just found people didn't remember, didn't know anything about it, which is exactly what you'd expect for an incident like this that occurred in private. But what they did find, interestingly enough, is one important piece of corroboration. They found another witness, another friend of Tara Reade's, who says that she remembers being told about it in the years afterwards. So she has a third corroborating witness that now, in addition to her original friend and her brother. So this is 3 more than Christine Blasey Ford had. Not that it matters that much, but it is important, the fact that when you say, why is she coming forward now? Well, there are 3 people now who attest that she actually told them about it long before she actually made this allegation public. And so that's important. The other thing is that they found an important piece of corroboration, which is they found multiple interns. When she was the staffer for Joe Biden, she was a supervisor of the interns, and they actually found 2 interns who confirm a critical part of her story, which is she says that she was removed all of a sudden from her supervising duties after she made this complaint, and the interns confirm that she was in fact suddenly removed from her duties, that she was no longer supervising them. They say they don't say that they knew why, but they do say that she was taken off of that role. So even though actually the New York Times says that it, quote, didn't find a corroboration of any details of Tara Reade's account, that's actually false, and they should probably retract that, because they in fact found corroboration of a critical detail, which is they found 2 people who had worked in the office who attested that she had in fact had her duties taken away from her. And that's really important, because it kind of leaves there's now a hole in Joe Biden's story, because the Biden campaign has not given an alternate explanation of why Tara Reade's duties were taken away from her, even though these multiple interns have now said this. So I mean, I think this story is written in a way that, like Amanda Marcot's story suggests, portrays itself as very sympathetic, but then tries to cast doubt in all these ways by saying things that shouldn't really cast doubt, like we talked to dozens of people and none of them remember it. Well, that's kind of expected. But if you read it closely, in fact, now we have 2 additional details, another witness and the 2 interns, that actually boost Tara Reade's account and nothing to undermine her. And there's a funny little thing that happened, which is that the New York Times, in fact, went through and removed
a passage of their article that was unfavorable to Joe Biden. Originally, they wrote, quote, "The Times found no pattern of sexual misconduct by Mr. Biden beyond the hugs, kisses, and touching that women previously said made them uncomfortable." They went through and they stealth-edited that out and said, now it just says the Times found no pattern of sexual misconduct by Mr. Biden. So there is someone at the New York Times who, I mean, we don't know if it's in response to direct pressure by the Biden campaign, but there is someone who had them remove something that they thought was too unfair to Biden. And in fact, it's worth understanding what this means, which is that they are literally removing facts, right? The hugs, kisses, and other what have you. They're removing facts that make Tara Reade more credible. And I think that's pretty indefensible, especially that they don't note it, that it's a stealth edit. And they deleted a tweet, in fact, in which they said, nor did any former Biden staff member corroborate any part of Reade's allegation, again, which is false, as I said. But then the tweet said, we found no pattern of misconduct beyond the big pattern of misconduct that had already been alleged. And then they deleted that. So I think it's pretty clear that someone at the Times is trying to make sure that this story doesn't damage Joe Biden too much. But importantly, from reading it, I really think it bolsters Tara Reade because they've done a big the investigation that people like Amanda Marcotte and people like Emily Alford at Jezebel have been calling for, this investigation. Well, they did a big investigation. They didn't find anything that undermined Tara Reade, and they did find critical details that corroborated her. So it's just worth noting now that the story is starting to break into the mainstream press that we still don't know anything that would lead us to believe that Tara Reade is any less credible than Christine Blasey Ford, and in fact, there is more corroboration in this case.